Microphone. Thank you.
Independent research has clearly shown, in economic terms, a cycle of creative destruction in the IP industries. The old system and model of IP is obsolete as it relates to the digital revolution. We need to provide new revenue streams for our creative talent, and monetizing the peer-to-peer networks is a great part of the solution to this problem. Will the government put forth an understanding of the process of creative destruction, stop looking at other countries who do not have a complete understanding of this process and how it relates to IP, and put forth a true Canadian approach that will allow our creative talent to emerge far ahead in a global marketplace? There's also a comment from Karen from Burlington. How will the new copyright legislation balance the needs of the creators and the needs of the research community? So it's a question. And finally, a comment from Silvana. As a Canadian who values how Canada is viewed on the world stage, I'm appalled that Canada was recently placed on the U.S. piracy list. Along with countries such as China, India, Russia, Canada has been identified as a country that does not sufficiently protect copyrighted material from widespread piracy. We require strong copyright laws to protect not only Canadian intellectual property, but the intellectual property of our international partners. If we do not adequately protect intellectual property, how do we expect foreign businesses to invest and do business in Canada? The continued inaction of our government has allowed a culture of piracy to thrive. File sharing, ripping and burning music is now the norm. We need a copyright regime to show our youth that creativity is a valued asset and not something that can be just borrowed, ripped, or burned for free. I implore the Canadian government to protect our cultural assets by implementing copyright that values such assets.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Thiago Kurtz, and I work at Sony Music. I have to agree wholeheartedly with the last speaker, and I also think that Jamie Kidd, the first speaker, I don't think he could have put in better perspective the way I feel as someone who works in the recorded music industry, in terms of what we strive to do, and the value that we place on our artists, and how what impacts them impacts us in the same way. I have a lot of friends who work in the industry. I have a lot of friends who are musicians, who are performers. I have family members who are performers, and everyone who I speak to about this issue feels very passionately about it. It's not an abstract legal concept. It is not something that that doesn't affect people's day-to-day lives. It affects my life. It affects my colleagues' lives. It affects my brother's life and his family's life. He's a performing musician. He has been for years. He's 37 years old, and he's been doing it like by the sweat of his back, and 200 days on the road, and he's committed to it because he's passionate about it, as are all of we. It struck me the other day that it has been more than 10 years since Napster started. It's been more than 10 years since Napster was launched, and it's been more than 10 years since Canada signed the WIPO Treaty. I mean, those two things happened around the same time, and WIPO was kind of foreshadowing Napster. We knew it was coming. WIPO was there and put forth these principles that would have prevented so many of the negative impacts of file sharing and what they've had on the industries, the cultural industries of Canada, which are not just music, it's film, it's TV, it's dance, it's poetry, as one of the former speakers said. I mean, this is something that Canada, more than 10 years ago, committed to enact into domestic law, and has failed to do so today, despite several attempts. What I hope is that this consultation process, and I applaud you for doing it, will lead to a copyright regime that respects the work of artists and the people who support them. That's record labels, that's film producers, that's production companies. I mean, there is a huge number of us who work in this industry and in the sector broadly, and we're part of the Canadian economy, and we are creating things that present Canada to the world. It's not just domestic; it's our international reputation, and it's fundamentally important to a huge number of Canadians. Thank you.
Minister.
My name is Paul Spurgeon, and I represent SOCAN. That's the Society of Composers, Authors, and Music Publishers of Canada. Now, for those who don't know about SOCAN, we represent composers, lyricists, songwriters, and music publishers, and the same group from around the world, Canadian and international. And we've done so for over 80 years in this country. On behalf of our over 35,000 active Canadian members and members of affiliated similar societies from around the world, we collectively administer a specific part of a copyright, a very important part of copyright. The copyright that we administer, the part of the copyright we administer, is the performing right in music and lyrics. In other words, the musical work. The performing right is that part of the copyright that gives owners of musical works the sole right to perform in public, to broadcast, to communicate their works, or to authorize others to do so in return for royalty payments. These performing right royalties are important to SOCAN members because they are the risk takers who don't get paid up front for creating songs. They rely on the downstream money. They rely on the money they receive in the form of royalties if their song is actually performed or communicated by others, whether it's on the radio or on television as part of a movie or television program. Now, the amount of copyright royalties our members receive is determined by the Copyright Board of Canada. This quasi-judicial tribunal balances the interests of both creators and users and allows interested parties the opportunity to be heard at very transparent public hearings, both copyright owners and copyright users. Now, my first comment on copyright reform is that the Government of Canada must not set up unwarranted exceptions or exemptions or limitations or in any way otherwise limit the copyright royalties paid when musical works are performed or communicated. If you deprive SOCAN's members of copyright royalties, you are basically asking over 35,000 Canadian individual risk takers, to take those risks and work for nothing. And that's not realistic, and it's not fair to those people. Minister, my last point this evening is that your officials must ensure that any changes to Canada's Copyright Act are carefully drafted and are crystal clear. If you don't get the wording right, you will generate confusion and you will clearly generate costly litigation. Now, SOCAN appreciates this opportunity to speak on behalf of Canadian music creators. We will work closely with your officials and provide you with a more detailed written submission shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.